In the quiet aftermath of a life well lived, a storm was brewing within the Roloff family, a tempest of suspicion and betrayal that would soon erupt into a legal war of epic proportions. The passing of Matt Roloff's father, Ron, a beloved patriarch known for his gentle spirit and love for his family, left a void that was quickly filled with heartbreak and disbelief. But this was no ordinary grief. According to explosive new reports and insider accounts that are just now coming to light, Ron's final wishes were allegedly hijacked in his most vulnerable moments. The centerpiece of this drama, a stunning, last-minute change to his will, a change that benefited one person at the expense of an entire generation of Roloff grandchildren. We are told the family was blindsided by a codicil that redirected a cherished classic car collection valued at over $300,000 directly to Matt, supposedly as a thank you for Caryn Chandler's care. This one act has ignited a firestorm, with Amy Roloff now stepping into the ring, not just as a grieving ex-daughter-in-law, but as a fierce protector of her children's inheritance, ready to expose what her legal team is calling a textbook case of elder fraud and manipulation. This is a story of alleged greed, broken trust, and a fight for justice that could permanently shatter the carefully constructed public image of the Roloff dynasty. Before we dive into the shocking details of the legal filings and the damning testimony that has been uncovered, make sure you are subscribed to LPBW Update. Click that bell icon so you don't miss a single breaking development in this story. And give this video a thumbs up to let us know you want more exclusive deep dives like this. The information we are about to reveal is explosive and could change everything you thought you knew about the key players in the Little People, Big World saga. The story begins, as many do, with a document. A will is more than just paper and ink. It is a final promise, a last testament to a person's love, their values, and their intentions for the family they leave behind. For years, sources close to the Roloff family have indicated that Ron Roloff was incredibly proud of his grandchildren. He had reportedly made his wishes crystal clear to multiple family members, including Amy, during his healthier years. His prized possession, a collection of classic automobiles he had lovingly restored and maintained over a lifetime, was his legacy. It was not just a collection of metal and chrome. It was a collection of memories, of weekend tinkering, of stories shared over a polished hood. The plan, as understood by everyone, was simple and fair. Upon his passing, the collection would be liquidated, and the proceeds, a substantial sum estimated to be in excess of $300,000, would be divided equally among all his grandchildren. It was to be a final gift from a doting grandfather, a nest egg to help them with college, a down payment on a house, or simply a cushion to start their adult lives. The day the will was read was, according to an insider who spoke to us on the condition of anonymity, a somber and emotionally charged affair. The family gathered, expecting to hear the familiar and comforting words they believed Ron had laid out. The initial portions of the will were read, confirming many of the standard bequests and final arrangements. A sense of sad finality settled over the room. And then the lawyer cleared his throat and announced the existence of a codicil. A codicil, for those who don't know, is an amendment, a legal modification to an existing will. This one was dated just weeks before Ron's death. The air in the room reportedly grew thick with tension. What could Ron have possibly needed to change at the 11th hour? The lawyer read the new clause aloud. The language was cold, legalistic, and utterly devastating. It stated in no uncertain terms that the previous provision regarding the car collection was now null and void. The entire collection, lock, stock, and barrel, was to be bequeathed solely to his son, Matt Roloff. The room fell into a stunned silence. But it was the justification, the note appended to the codicil, that turned shock into suspicion. The note, allegedly penned by the lawyer but based on instructions, stated the gift was to thank Caryn for her dedicated care in his final days. According to our source, the immediate reaction was one of pure confusion. The grandchildren, Zach, Jeremy, Molly, and Jacob, looked at each other, their faces a mixture of hurt and disbelief. This made no sense. Why would their grandfather, a man who adored them, suddenly cut them out completely? And why was Caryn Chandler's name attached to it? While Caryn had indeed been a presence during Ron's final illness, a fact no one disputed, the idea that her caregiving would warrant a $300,000 redirection of inheritance away from his own blood seemed preposterous. It felt to many in the room like a slap in the face. Matt, we are told, was defensive from the outset. He allegedly claimed to be just as surprised as anyone, but insisted they had to respect his father's final wishes. He spoke of how much Caryn had done, how she had been there day and night, and how his father had grown to rely on her completely. He framed it as a beautiful final gesture of gratitude from a thankful man. Caryn, who was also present, reportedly appeared overcome with emotion, dabbing at her eyes and saying that she never expected anything, that she had cared for Ron out of pure love. But for Amy and her children, the performance, as one source described it, rang hollow. The pieces didn't add up. The days following the will reading were filled with hushed, frantic phone calls and tense conversations. The grandchildren were heartbroken, not just about the money, but about the implication that their grandfather had somehow forgotten them or valued them less at the end. It was a stain on their final memories of him. Amy, watching her children's pain, felt a growing sense of unease. She remembered her own conversations with Ron. She remembered his pride in the grandkids, his explicit statements about the car collection. The man she knew would never have done this. Something was terribly wrong. Her maternal instincts, sharpened by years of navigating the complex dynamics of the Roloff family, told her that this was not the work of a man of sound mind, but the result of something far more sinister. She began to suspect that Ron, in his weakened and ailing state, had been a victim of manipulation, and all signs in her mind pointed directly to Caryn Chandler. This is where the battle truly began. Amy knew that challenging a will is a monumental undertaking, an ugly, expensive, and emotionally draining process that pits family member against family member. It's a path many are unwilling to take. But as she saw it, she had no choice. This wasn't just about a car collection. It was about defending Ron's true legacy and protecting her children from being disinherited through what she believed was deceit. After a heartfelt discussion with her husband, Chris Marek, whose sources say fully supported her, Amy made a decision. She was going to fight. Her first step was to seek out legal counsel, and not just any lawyer. She was advised to find a specialist, a probate litigator with a proven track record in contesting wills, specifically on the grounds of undue influence and lack of testamentary capacity. These are the two pillars upon which her entire case would be built. Let's break down what these legal terms actually mean, because it's crucial to understanding the gravity of Amy's accusation. Lack of testamentary capacity is the legal standard for being of sound mind to create or amend a will. It doesn't mean a person has to be in perfect health, but they must, at the moment of signing, understand three basic things: that they are signing a will, the nature and extent of their property, and who their natural heirs are, the people who would normally inherit from them. Amy's legal team would argue that in his final weeks, heavily medicated and battling a terminal illness, Ron Roloff did not meet this standard. He was, they would contend, in a state of cognitive decline that made him incapable of understanding the complex legal ramifications of signing that codicil. The second and perhaps more explosive accusation is undue influence. This is a far more insidious claim. Undue influence occurs when a person in a position of power or trust uses that position to manipulate someone into changing their will for the influencer's benefit. It's not just gentle persuasion, it's a form of coercion that substitutes the influencer's will for the will of the person signing the document. To prove it, Amy's lawyers would need to show 4 key elements: that Ron was susceptible to influence due to his illness and dependence, that Caryn had the opportunity to exert this influence, that she had the disposition or motive to do so for financial gain, and that the result, the disinheritance of the natural heirs, the grandchildren, was an unnatural and suspicious outcome. Armed with this legal framework, Amy's lawyer, a seasoned litigator we'll call Mr. Davies for the sake of this report, began to assemble the case. The first order of business was to file a formal contest to the codicil and probate court. This legal maneuver effectively froze the distribution of the car collection, preventing Matt from taking possession of it until the court could rule on the validity of the amendment. The filing sent shockwaves through the family. Matt was reportedly furious, viewing it as a direct attack on his integrity and on Caryn's character. He saw it as Amy being unable to let go of the past, stirring up trouble where there was none. The battle lines were officially drawn. Mr. Davies and his team immediately launched a meticulous investigation, a process known as discovery. They subpoenaed a mountain of documents. The first and most crucial were Ron's complete medical records for the last 6 months of his life. These records, according to a source with knowledge of the legal proceedings, painted a grim picture. They detailed the aggressive pain management regimen Ron was on, listing powerful opioids and sedatives known to cause confusion, disorientation, and memory loss. Doctor's notes and nurses' logs allegedly contained entries describing Ron as pleasantly confused, disoriented to time and place, and having periods of lucidity interspersed with significant cognitive deficits. This was the foundation for the lack of testamentary capacity claim. The documents themselves suggested that Ron's mind was not consistently his own in those final weeks. Next, the legal team began tracking down and interviewing potential witnesses. They spoke with family, friends, neighbors, and, most importantly, the healthcare professionals who had cared for Ron. This is where the narrative began to shift dramatically in Amy's favor. Several sources who were interviewed by the legal team reportedly confirmed that Ron often seemed confused. One family friend allegedly told investigators that they had called to speak with Ron a week before he passed, and Caryn had answered the phone, stating that Ron was not up for calls and was having a bad day. This began to establish a pattern of isolation, a common tactic used by those exerting undue influence. By controlling access to the vulnerable person, the influencer can shape their reality and prevent them from getting outside advice or perspective. But the real breakthrough, the smoking gun of the case, came from a source no one in the family had considered: the hospice nurse. Hospice nurses are unique professionals. They are present during the most intimate and vulnerable moments of a person's life and death. They are trained observers, meticulously documenting every detail of their patient's condition, both physical and mental. They are, in a court of law, highly credible witnesses with no personal stake in the family drama. Amy's legal team learned that a specific agency had provided Ron's end-of-life care. After some legal wrangling to get the employment records, they identified the primary nurse who had been assigned to Ron in his final 2 weeks. Her name, we will say for this report, is Sarah. When Sarah was contacted by the investigators, she was initially hesitant to get involved, but under the legal obligation of a subpoena for a deposition, she had no choice but to tell her story under oath. A deposition is a pre-trial questioning of a witness conducted by the opposing lawyers, and it is recorded on video and transcribed by a court reporter. Every word is legally binding testimony. We have received an exclusive report detailing the contents of this videotaped deposition, and it is nothing short of damning. The scene was a sterile conference room. Amy was present with her lawyer, Mr. Davies. On the other side of the table were Matt and Caryn's attorneys, ready to object and try to control the damage. Sarah, the nurse, sat at the head of the table, calm and professional. Mr. Davies began the questioning gently, establishing Sarah's credentials and her role in Ron Roloff's care. He then moved to the crucial time period. His voice was calm and steady as he asked the first key question. In the last 2 weeks of his life, would you describe Mr. Ron Roloff as being of sound mind? Sarah, according to the transcript we were briefed on, did not hesitate. She looked directly at the camera and answered, "He was heavily medicated. He had good moments, but he was often confused about the time and who people were. He would sometimes call me by his late wife's name. He struggled to follow conversations for more than a minute or two." Matt and Caryn's lawyer immediately tried to intervene, suggesting that good moments meant he could have had capacity. But Sarah's initial answer had already laid the groundwork. Mr. Davies pressed on, zeroing in on the day the codicil was signed. "Do you recall a visit from a lawyer with Miss Chandler on or around that date?" This was the moment that would blow the case wide open. Sarah took a sip of water, her eyes referencing her own detailed notes that she had been compelled to bring. "Yes," she said, "I remember it distinctly. Miss Chandler arrived with a man in a suit carrying a briefcase. She introduced him as their farm lawyer and said they had some routine papers that needed to be signed." The atmosphere in the deposition room reportedly became electric. Amy leaned forward, hanging on every word. Mr. Davies continued, his tone measured. "Please describe for the record what you observed." Sarah's testimony was precise and devastating. Caryn brought the lawyer into Ron's room. Ron was very groggy. He had just had a dose of his pain medication. Caryn was very cheerful, very loud. She said it was just some farm papers. She told Ron, "Just sign this, honey. It's to help Matt with the estate." She physically took his hand and guided it to the signature line on the document. He was very tired and just signed where she pointed. He did not read the document. The lawyer did not explain the document to him. The entire interaction took less than 5 minutes. A wave of shock went through Amy's side of the room. This was more than they could have hoped for. This was a first-hand professional account of direct manipulation. But it got worse. Mr. Davies asked, "Did anything about this interaction strike you as unusual?" Sarah's response sealed Caryn's fate. "Yes, it was highly irregular. In my profession, we are trained to watch for signs of elder abuse and financial exploitation. The patient was clearly not in a state to be conducting business. The fact that the document wasn't explained and that she was physically directing him to sign while minimizing its importance was a major red flag. I noted it in my patient log because it seemed unusual and unethical." The mention of her official patient log, a contemporaneous professional record, gave her testimony unimpeachable credibility. It wasn't just her memory, it was documented. Finally, Mr. Davies delivered the finishing blow, a question designed to provide the court with an expert opinion. "So, in your professional opinion, as his registered nurse, was Mr. Ronald Roloff in a state to understand a complex legal document that would alter his will and disinherit his grandchildren?" Sarah's answer was unequivocal and delivered with the full weight of her medical authority. Absolutely not. He was not lucid. He was being directed. He didn't have the cognitive capacity to understand what he was signing, let alone the consequences of it. He did not have the capacity to make that decision independently. The deposition ended shortly after. Matt and Caryn's lawyers had no effective cross-examination. How could they? They couldn't challenge the nurse's professional assessment or her detailed, documented notes. When the video was turned off, the legal landscape had been irrevocably altered. Amy's team no longer had just a theory. They had a credible, impartial witness who had painted a vivid picture of classic undue influence and a complete lack of testamentary capacity. They had, for all intents and purposes, a confession from a third-party observer. The release of this deposition transcript within the legal proceedings sent a panic through Matt and Caryn's camp. According to sources, their legal team immediately knew they were in trouble. This wasn't a he said, she said family squabble anymore. This was a medical professional testifying under oath to facts that were legally catastrophic for their case. The story Caryn and Matt had been pushing, that this was a loving, final gift from a clear-minded Ron, had been utterly dismantled. The immediate aftermath of the deposition was a flurry of legal activity. Amy's lawyer, Mr. Davies, filed a motion for summary judgment. This is a legal request asking the judge to make a ruling based on the overwhelming evidence at hand, without the need for a full, drawn-out trial. The motion included excerpts from the nurse's deposition, copies of her patient logs, and supporting documentation from Ron's medical records detailing his medication schedule and cognitive state. The argument was simple. There is no genuine dispute of the material facts. The evidence is so clear that a trial is unnecessary. The codicil was procured through manipulation and must be invalidated. For Amy, this was a moment of profound, albeit somber, vindication. The truth, as she had suspected it, was now out in the open, recorded, and on the legal record. Yet, it was also deeply painful. This was confirmation that her former father-in-law, a man she had cared about for decades, had been taken advantage of at his most helpless moment. It was a betrayal not just to the grandchildren, but to the memory of Ron himself. The fight was no longer just for her children. It was a fight to restore Ron's dignity and ensure his true wishes were honored. As the judge reviewed the motion and the explosive evidence attached, the entire Roloff family stood at a precipice. The court's decision would not only determine the fate of a $300,000 inheritance, but it would also serve as a final judgment on the character and actions of Caryn Chandler. The stage was set for a legal verdict that would send shockwaves through the little people, big world universe, exposing a conspiracy that had been masked by feigned grief and false sentiment. The nurse's testimony had provided the key, unlocking a truth that had been deliberately buried. The evidence presented to the probate judge was, according to legal experts who have been following the case, an open and shut example of what lawyers call a classic case of elder exploitation. The timeline was damning. The medical records established Ron's vulnerability. The financial motive was clear. The unnatural change to a long-standing estate plan was a massive red flag. And now, the deposition of the hospice nurse provided the final, irrefutable piece of the puzzle, a credible eyewitness account of the manipulation in action. The judge, an experienced probate jurist who had seen countless contested wills, was presented with a clear and compelling narrative. On one side, there was the long-standing will, a document created when Ron was healthy and of sound mind, a will that reflected his well-known love for all his grandchildren. On the other side was a hastily executed codicil, signed in the final, fog-filled days of his life, a document that radically altered his legacy to benefit the son of his caregiver. When combined with the nurse's testimony, it created an undeniable picture of undue influence. The day of the ruling arrived. It wasn't in a dramatic, packed courtroom as you might see on television. Rulings on motions like this are often delivered through a written order after the judge has reviewed all the filings. When the email landed in the inboxes of the respective legal teams, it was definitive. The judge had granted Amy's motion. The codicil was to be thrown out. The judge's written ruling, a portion of which was leaked to our sources, was a scathing indictment of the circumstances surrounding the codicil. The judge's words carried the cold, hard weight of legal authority. The ruling stated, "The evidence presented to this court is clear and convincing. The decedent, Mr. Ron Roloff, was suffering from significant cognitive impairment due to his illness and the palliative medications he was properly prescribed. Based on the medical records and the highly credible testimony of his hospice care provider, this court finds that he lacked the required testamentary capacity to understand and execute this codicil on the date in question." The ruling went on to address the even more serious allegation of manipulation. The judge wrote, "Furthermore, the testimony points to a classic case of undue influence. The primary caregiver, Ms. Chandler, was in a confidential position of trust and power over the deceased. She had the opportunity to influence him, and the resulting codicil, which financially benefits her partner and indirectly herself by way of her partner's enrichment, represents a drastic and unnatural departure from the decedent's previously expressed testamentary plan. The caregiver exploited their position of trust for financial gain." The final declaration was a complete victory for Amy and the grandchildren. Therefore, the ruling concluded, "The codicil dated March 12th is hereby declared void and invalid. The court orders the original terms of the will to be executed. The car collection will be distributed to the grandchildren as originally intended." The news of the verdict spread like wildfire. For Amy, it was a moment of immense relief and vindication. The legal system had worked, the truth had prevailed. She had successfully defended not only her children's rightful inheritance, but also the honor of Ron's memory. The court had officially recognized that the codicil was not Ron's true wish, but a product of manipulation. She immediately called Zach, Jeremy, Molly, and Jacob to share the news. The reaction was one of overwhelming gratitude and emotional release. The cloud of suspicion that had hung over their grandfather's last days had finally been lifted. They had their inheritance back, but more importantly, they had their grandfather's legacy back. The aftermath of this legal bombshell has been catastrophic for Caryn Chandler's reputation and her standing within the Roloff family. To be exposed in a court of law for manipulating a dying man for profit is a moral stain that is impossible to wash away. The judge's ruling wasn't just a legal opinion, it was a public declaration of her character. The carefully crafted image of the devoted caregiver was shattered, replaced by the portrait of a calculating opportunist. The trust that had been tenuously built with the rest of the family was completely destroyed. How could the grandchildren ever look at her the same way again, knowing that a court found she had tried to orchestrate the theft of their inheritance from their dying grandfather? For Matt Roloff, the situation is equally disastrous. While he was not named as the direct manipulator, he was the sole beneficiary of the fraudulent codicil. His fierce defense of it, his insistence that it was his father's true wish, now looks foolish at best and complicit at worst. Did he know what Caryn was doing? Was he a willing participant in the scheme, or was he simply duped by the woman he loves? Either way, his judgment is called into serious question. His relationship with his own children, which was already strained over the farm disputes, has likely suffered an irreparable blow. He chose to side with Caryn against his kids, and a judge has now declared that his kids were the ones in the right. The financial and emotional fallout from this single greedy act will likely reverberate for years to come. Amy Roloff, on the other hand, emerges from this battle as a hero. She stood up against injustice, took on a painful and public fight, and won. She has been validated as the protector of her family, the matriarch who fought to preserve the legacy of a man she respected, ensuring that his love for his grandchildren would be his final, enduring message. The conspiracy has been unmasked, and the truth, however ugly, has finally been brought into the light. The digital echo of the judge's gavel had barely faded before the real-world consequences began to cascade through the Roloff family, creating fractures so deep they may never be repaired. The court's ruling was not merely a legal decision, it was a moral earthquake. In the immediate aftermath, our sources paint a picture of two starkly different realities, two camps reacting to the same news with completely opposing emotions. In Amy Roloff's world, there was a profound sense of heavy-hearted victory. We are told there were no champagne corks popping, no celebratory parties. Instead, it was a moment of quiet, tearful phone calls between a mother and her children. Amy, having shouldered the immense burden of this fight, finally had the validation she sought. The court had seen the truth she had seen. A source very close to the family described a call between Amy and Zach, where he reportedly told his mother, through a voice thick with emotion, "Thank you, Mom. You gave us Grandpa back. It was never about the cars, it was about them trying to rewrite who he was." This sentiment was echoed by all the children. They felt their grandfather's memory had been rescued from a narrative of betrayal. The inheritance was now secondary to the restoration of their grandfather's true intentions and character. For Amy, this was the ultimate prize. Seeing her children feel that sense of justice and peace, knowing that the last chapter of Ron Roloff's life would be defined by his love for them, not by a document born of manipulation. Contrast this with the scene inside Matt and Caryn's home, which insiders describe as nothing short of a pressure cooker of rage and recrimination. The news of the verdict was reportedly met with stunned disbelief, which quickly curdled into fury. Matt, a man used to being in control, had been rendered powerless by a judge's decree. He allegedly saw this not as a legal defeat, but as a personal, humiliating betrayal orchestrated by his ex-wife. We are told he was inconsolable, pacing and ranting about the injustice of it all, blaming a biased system in Amy's vendetta against him and Caryn. He couldn't or wouldn't accept the evidence that had been laid bare. His reality was one in which Ron, in a moment of pure clarity and gratitude, had chosen to honor Caryn. To accept the judge's ruling would be to accept that he had been either a fool or a co-conspirator, and Matt Roloff's ego would allow for neither. But the most intense fallout, sources say, was between Matt and Caryn themselves. The public facade of a united front began to crack under the immense pressure. Caryn, we are told, retreated into a defensive posture, playing the victim. She reportedly wept, claiming she had been unfairly vilified for simply caring for a dying man. She insisted her intentions were pure and that the nurse had misunderstood or misremembered the entire event. She framed herself as a martyr, punished for her own kindness. However, the judge's words, specifically exploited their position of trust for financial gain, hung in the air between them, a toxic and unavoidable accusation. The question that must have haunted Matt in those first hours and days was a simple one. Did you lie to me? Was this all a calculated move? The foundation of their relationship, supposedly built on trust and partnership, had been rocked to its core. The $300,000 prize had vanished, and in its place was a crater of suspicion and public shame. With the legal victory secured, the focus now shifts to the deeper, more troubling questions that this lawsuit has unearthed. How did this happen? What was the true motivation behind this audacious attempt to alter a dying man's will? Our insiders and legal analysts have pointed to a convergence of theories, each more disturbing than the last. The first, and most straightforward, is the theory of financial opportunism. Let's be frank, $300,000 is a life-changing amount of money. While Matt Roloff has been successful, The farm is an expensive enterprise, and he and Caryn were in the midst of planning a new, expensive dream home on the property. It's not a stretch to theorize that they saw the car collection as a pool of accessible capital, a way to fund their future without having to sell off more land or take out substantial loans. A source with knowledge of their financial planning suggests that the timing was just too convenient. Ron's health was failing, the grandkids were at a distance, and Caryn had near constant, unsupervised access. It was the perfect opportunity. The codicil, under this theory, was a calculated financial maneuver, a cold, hard business decision wrapped in the sentimental guise of a thank you. But a second, more complex theory suggests this was about more than just money. It was about power. It was about Caryn Chandler solidifying her role as the new matriarch of the Roloff dynasty. Think about the symbolism of it. The car collection was Ron's legacy to the next generation, a direct link from the patriarch to the grandchildren from his son's first marriage, Amy's children. By redirecting that legacy away from them and funneling it through Matt, with her name explicitly attached as the reason, Caryn was, in effect, attempting to sever that historical line. It was a symbolic act of erasure. The note, to thank Caryn for her dedicated care, was designed to cement her importance in the family history, to elevate her status from caregiver to a figure so pivotal that she warranted a massive inheritance shift. It was a move to rewrite the family narrative, placing herself at the center and pushing Amy's children to the margins. In this light, the codicil wasn't just about enriching Matt, it was about validating Caryn's position and power within the family structure, a power she felt was perhaps not fully respected by the older children. This brings us to the most uncomfortable question of all. What did Matt know, and when did he know it? The court's ruling focused on Caryn's influence, but Matt was the sole beneficiary. It is nearly impossible to believe he was a complete bystander. This has led insiders to float three potential scenarios regarding his complicity. The most generous interpretation is that Matt was a willing dupe, so blinded by his love for Caryn and his own grief that he simply accepted her version of events without question. In this scenario, Caryn presents him with the signed codicil, perhaps saying, look what your father wanted to do for us. And Matt, wanting to believe in this grand romantic gesture, accepts it at face value. He sees it as a beautiful story, a testament to the woman he loves, and he defends it fiercely because to question it would be to question her. This paints him as naive and easily manipulated, but not malicious. A more cynical and perhaps more realistic scenario is one of willful ignorance. In this version, Matt knew his father's cognitive state was declining. He saw the opportunity, saw Caryn making her move, but chose to look the other way. He didn't ask the tough questions. He didn't say, are you sure he understood this? Should we have had Amy or the kids on a call? He allowed it to happen because it benefited him. He could maintain a degree of plausible deniability while still reaping the rewards. He wasn't the one guiding Ron's hand, but he was more than happy to cash the check. This theory paints him not as a master manipulator, but as a morally weak accomplice who put his own financial gain and his partner's desires ahead of his father's true wishes and his children's inheritance. The third and most explosive theory, one that is being whispered among those who have completely lost faith in him, is that Matt was an active co-conspirator. This theory suggests that the plan was hatched by both Matt and Caryn. Perhaps the idea started small, with Caryn musing, it's a shame all that money is going to the kids when we could use it for our house. And Matt, instead of shutting it down, helped cultivate it. In this darkest scenario, they planned the timing, chose the farm lawyer who wouldn't ask too many questions, and rehearsed the story they would tell the family. His defensiveness at the will reading wasn't the reaction of a surprised son. It was the performance of a guilty man trying to control the narrative he helped create. The court may not have had enough direct evidence to name him in the undue influence finding, but for the family members who subscribe to this theory, Matt is just as culpable as Caryn, if not more so. He wasn't just a son, he was the gatekeeper to his father, and he chose to let the fox into the hen house. The ripple effect of this verdict on the family dynamics is already proving to be devastating and permanent. The fragile relationship between Matt and his children has been shattered. For Zach and Jeremy in particular, this was the ultimate betrayal. After the bitter and public disputes over the sale of the farm, this lawsuit was the final straw. A source close to Zach and Tori revealed that Tori was apoplectic when she learned the full details from the nurse's deposition. She reportedly sees this as an unforgivable attack on her husband and her children's legacy. The feeling is that if Matt would allow Caryn to do this to his own father, there are no lines he won't cross. Any hope of a genuine reconciliation, of holiday gatherings and happy family photos, appears to be gone. The grandchildren will now grow up knowing that their own grandfather and his partner attempted to disinherit them from what was rightfully theirs. That is a wound that time cannot easily heal. Jacob, the family's outspoken intellectual and frequent critic of the show's curated reality, has reportedly been privately fuming. While he has remained publicly silent so far, an insider suggests he views this entire episode as the predictable, rotten fruit of a family that has prioritized fame and fortune over integrity for far too long. He sees Caryn's actions and Matt's complicity as a symptom of a deeper moral sickness. We wouldn't be surprised if a cryptic but pointed social media post emerges in the coming weeks, a condemnation of the greed that he feels has torn his family apart. Molly, who has always kept her distance from the family drama, is said to be deeply saddened but not entirely surprised. Her decision to live a private life away from the farm, looking wiser with each passing scandal. This legal defeat also creates a massive public relations crisis for Matt and Caryn, and by extension, for the show's network, TLC. How do you spin a court ruling that essentially labels your show's star's fiancé as an elder fraudster? You can't. Insiders report that frantic conversations are happening between the Roloffs and the show's producers. The standard playbook would be to either ignore the lawsuit entirely on the show, creating a bizarre disconnect with reality, or to address it head-on, allowing Matt and Caryn to present their heavily sanitized version of events. We can almost write the script for that scene now. Matt and Caryn sitting on their porch swing, looking earnestly into the camera. Matt would say something like, "It's been a tough time for the family. There were some disagreements about my dad's will, and unfortunately it got messy. It's heartbreaking when people you love let old resentments cloud their judgment." Caryn would tearfully add, "All I ever did was love Ron. To have my intentions twisted like this has been the most painful experience of my life. But Matt and I have each other, and we know the truth." They will attempt to frame Amy as a bitter, money-grubbing ex-wife and themselves as the innocent victims of her wrath. But now, with the judge's ruling on the public record, that narrative will be a much harder sell for a fan base that is growing increasingly skeptical. This entire affair forces us to re-examine the entire history of Caryn Chandler's involvement with the Roloff family. It casts a dark shadow over her entire story. Was her initial friendship with Matt when she was the farm manager truly just a friendship? Was her kindness and helpfulness always part of a long-term strategy to ingratiate herself and secure a position of power and wealth? These are the questions fans and family members are now asking. Every past action is being reevaluated through this new lens of proven manipulation. Her transformation from employee to partner to the woman at the center of a major family scandal is a dramatic and cautionary tale. The judge's ruling didn't just void a codicil, it voided her credibility. It exposed the possibility that the persona of the loving, supportive partner was a carefully constructed mask, and a court of law just ripped it off for everyone to see. Looking forward, the future of the Roloff family and the iconic Roloff farms is more uncertain than ever. The dream that Matt so often spoke of his grandchildren running through the pumpkin patch and one day taking over the farm, is now a fantasy. That dream died the day he chose not to sell to his sons, and this lawsuit was the final nail in its coffin. The bridges have been burned, and the trust has been incinerated. It's highly probable that we will see Matt, now estranged from his children and with a partner whose reputation is in tatters, finally decide to sell the entire farm to an outside developer. The legal fees from this fight alone would have been substantial, adding yet another financial pressure. The farm, once a symbol of family unity and overcoming challenges, would become a monument to family dysfunction and greed. The legacy of the Roloffs has been permanently altered. They are no longer just the charming family from the little show that could. They are now a case study in how fame, money, and new relationships can tear a family to shreds. In this chapter of their story, Amy Roloff is the undisputed protagonist. She saw an injustice, and against what must have been immense personal and emotional costs, she fought for what was right. She stood up to her powerful ex-husband and his influential partner, and through the force of truth and evidence, she won. She protected her children, she honored Ron's memory, and she exposed a painful truth that needed to be seen. The conspiracy may have been unmasked, but the scars from this battle will last a lifetime. A permanent reminder of the day the Roloff family truly went to war with itself. The legal battle may be over, but the emotional fallout is just beginning. What do you believe? Was Matt a willing participant or a blind fool? And can the Roloff family ever truly recover from a betrayal this deep? Let us know your theories in the comments below, and make sure you stay subscribed to LPBW Update, because we will be tracking every new development in this shocking family saga.